Throughout history, access to technology has defined progress and industrial revolution. Industrial revolution accelerated economies but left entire economies behind. Electricity, telephone connectivity, connected some and excluded others. Today, as AI, blockchain, and digital finance reshape the world, the same question remains. Who gets left behind? Right now, 17% of the SDGs targets are on track, only 17%, and more than 2.6 billion people are still lack internet access. The digital divide is not just about connectivity, it's about opportunity, governance, and investment. The gap between those who have access to the technology and those who don't is deepening. And unless we act fast, digital transformation will become another driver for inequality rather than a force for inclusion. This session is about solutions. How do we ensure equal access to digital infrastructure? How do we ring-fence technology investments from geopolitical volatility? How do we scale innovations in both the public and the private sector to accelerate the SDGs? And critically, how do we ensure that economic gains of digital transformation are invested into society rather than concentrated in the hands of the few? Welcome everyone to this distinguished discussion about digital divide to digital solution, tech first path to SDGs. My name is Mohammed Sharhan. I'm the Managing Director of the World Government Summit Organization in the United Arab Emirates and the Director of Government Leaders and Talents at the UAE Prime Minister's Office. It's a privilege to moderate today's discussion with this exceptional panelists. To ensure a smooth and engaging discussion, here's how we'll proceed. We'll begin with a moderated conversation for about 45 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of audience Q&A. During the Q&A, I kindly ask you that the questions be kept brief and focused, with no statements or comment, just your name, your organization, and your question, and who is addressed to. Now, let me introduce our distinguished panelists. Mr. Abhishek Singh, the Additional Secretary at the Ministry of Electronic and IT in India. Welcome. Mr. Andreas Orschitz, the Chief Marketing Officer of Infineon Technologies in Germany. Del Bawa, the CEO of Web3 Africa Group from Ghana. Marianne Demarche, the CEO of EMEA Swift France. And last but not least, Stephanie Depivine, the Senior Researcher Fellow of Digital Societies, ODI Global UK. Let's dive straight into this conversation. I'll start with the first round of these questions, which I'll address one question per panelist. First, we'll look at the big picture, laying the groundwork. I'll start with you, Mr. Abhishek. And this question is more specific to what India has been doing over the last few years. India has built some of the world's most ambitious digital public goods, like Aadhaar and UPI, transforming financial inclusion. However, many nations struggle to scale such initiatives. What are the biggest barriers to replicating India's success in other regions, and how can governments learn and accelerate digital transformation with limited resources?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this background and this very relevant question. Because whenever we look at replicating digital public infrastructure, whenever we look at India's stack, sometimes people start thinking that it's something that can be just retrofitted, Control C, Control V. Doesn't happen like that. Because if you look at India's also story about building Aadhaar or UPI or DigiLocker or DEPA architecture or projects in the field of health, education, skilling, it's not only about technology. It's more about people, it's more about resources, it's more about institutions, more about capacity building. Because all these projects, while the technological solutions were there led by the best of the experts, and technology today is no longer a challenge. There are companies around who will come and build whatever you want. But building the right institutions and building the right capacities in the relevant government entities become the very, very important factor. Like, for example, when Aadhaar was conceptualized, it was like a mammoth project, 1.4 billion people. How do you give them biometric identities? And how do you ensure that every government vertical follows a diktat for that? So that was, in fact, not only a technological project, the institutional framework, the unique identification authority of India, which was constituted with statutory powers, with legal enablement, was very, very critical. Then it brought in the right amount kind of people from government and industry who came in, who spent their time in building that. So the amount of investment that was spent in institution building, getting the right people, right talent from the private sector, from the not-for-profit sector who joined hands, and the effort that was meant in order to onboard all government departments, and more importantly, the state governments, because which are the ones in a federal polity, they are the ones which are actually responsible for implementation of programs. So that contributed a lot. Similarly, when we look at UPI, there also the technology piece was not very, very difficult, challenging. It was just building an interoperable messaging protocol between various financial institutions so that a financial request from one institution is agreed on and actioned upon by the other. But the real issue was, how do you get more than 400 banks onboarded on that? And there the role that was played by RBI, the financial regulator in India, and the National Payments Corporation of India, which was incorporated as a company which was driving the whole adoption, became very, very important. So once again, the institutional framework, the legal enablement, the support from the top level from our Prime Minister became very, very critical for the success of that. And I can go across, like whether it's DigiLocker, whether it's data architecture, whether it's eSanjeevani, whether it's education, every project we have seen that getting the right people, building the institutions and doing capacity building is the key to successful replication or adoption of these projects. So any country in the global south or in the low and medium income countries which are looking at adopting that, they will only have to think of that. It's not only that you take these projects and try to implicate, you'll have to go back, think of, yes, I want to do an ID project or I want to do a payments project. Look at the current level of digitization, look at the current level of institutional framework in your own country. It might not be the same everywhere. Every country is different. And then try to see what is it that you need to do, what are the gaps that need to be fulfilled. And then you bring in the right people, set up the institutional framework, provide leadership from the top, do the legal enablement, and then the technologies will come and build it up. So I would say that these factors become very, very critical when any country is looking at adoption of these technologies.
Thank you, Minister. I'll move to you, Mr. Orchids. Today, the world is in a semiconductor race, with chips powering everything from AI to clean energy, but many developing nations lack access to these foundational technologies. How can global semiconductors players like Infineon ensure that emerging markets aren't locked out of the digital economy?
Look, when you talk about digitalization, one of the important thing is to have hardware available, which is the backbone of digitalization and which needs to be affordable. When you think about digital in our day-to-day life, the first thing that typically comes to my mind is my smartphone. Today, many people own a smartphone, but by far not everyone. And availability of gadgets such as a telephone that provides you access and provides each and everyone on planet Earth access to digital, if you will, that requires such devices to be simply affordable. And here comes the role into play, the role of semiconductors. Few people know that in each and every piece of electronics you have semiconductors. You have semiconductors which give electricity and manage electricity or power within electric gadgets. You have electric gadgets that are connected to the internet. Also that requires chips. You have compute power in each and every gadget. A smartphone today uses a chip for doing all the compute work, which has up to 10,000 times the calculation capability or calculation power relative to the Apollo 13 rocket many, many years ago, that you can find, so to say, in microelectronic systems here. This is business where semiconductor companies have and play a major role to provide the chips that make such gadgets at the end of the day affordable for each and everyone. And global availability at best cost, if you will, of whatever sort of semiconductors, so be it power chips, be it microcontrollers, be it sensors also, like in the case of a smartphone needs to hear when I talk. That is done by a semiconductor sensor. Just to give an example, that is the name of the game. And that is where Infineon also is working on. We are globalizing, if you will, our supply chains. And by globalization, We make sure that we have each and every production and R&D step done in those countries where we find the best scaling opportunity, economy of scale and economy of scope, if you will. That again then provides to sort of make chips available at the most affordable point that commercially makes sense. And that is our contribution, and that's also our obligation to society.
Thank you, Andreas. I'll move to you, Del. Blockchain and Web3 are often seen as disruptive forces for financial inclusion. Yet in Africa, adoption remains fragmented, due mainly to regulatory uncertainty. What needs to happen for blockchain and Web3 to move from an experiment to an everyday financial tool on the continent?
Yes, a really great question. So I probably use my current experience as the best explanation. And so about maybe 2.5 years ago, we set out on a journey with the Central Bank of Ghana to establish what this industry could look like, well, not just in Ghana, but across Africa as a whole. And the first thing I said to them is there needs to be a collaborative discussion with the community being the Web3 community. So not just crypto, but all digital asset related opportunities. We set out on that journey, and that journey started actually with a trip that was made by Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum. So he came to spend 2 weeks with us. We had a very, very good experience in that 2 weeks, understanding of what Ethereum's perspective is in Africa and what the institutional perspective is versus the local community. So fast forward, we set out a team with the Central Bank of Ghana to establish a policy framework, right? Prior to that, it was very gray, and that meant there were platforms that were out there, maybe, to be honest, doing a lot of OTC business, right? And so most of the crypto exchanges that are in Africa, where majority of their revenues were coming in from, was the OTC business. And as I said, policy-wise, it was very gray. Now, where we are is through conversations with the community of what's actually needed and what the government, or should I say the institutions, are trying to protect. We now have the first digital asset framework policy launched by the Central Bank of Ghana. This is 2 years later. And that involved constant dialogue. We now also have a sandbox that is due to launch with 4 other key players, including Coinbase. So we have local players, and then we have international players. So you have your Coinbase, you have your Stellar, we have your Circle, all interested. Why are they interested? They're interested because I've always said that Africa's GDP stagnation is because we're looking in the same places, right? We need to look in new places, and those new places heavily revolve around digital infrastructure, which is what our business is focused on. And so 3 areas: policy, education, and then you move to actual commercialization. And so now that we have this policy framework, the next thing is we have an actual sandbox. And this sandbox is now in place with all the selected local players, international players as well. And we're now going to be able to test. We have a test bed, right, to approach the problems that we see on the ground. Web3 is not a fad in Africa. It's actually a necessity. We actually need it for, the bankless. This is a real issue, in rural areas. Obviously, trade between countries, stable coins, could be very, very, provide very strong utility on the continent. And so I would say, from my personal experience, working hand in hand with the institutions and the community has brought us, moved us forward very quickly, actually. And as I said, we're now moving to a place where we now are going to actually test products within real life environments over the next year.
Thank you, Del. I totally agree with your point of Web3 being a necessity in Africa. If I may reflect on something that happened in the UAE back in 2017, at a conversation at the World Government Summit, we hosted a group of experts in AI, including Elon Musk and Reid Hoffman and others. And the discussion was about what should governments do about AI. Everyone agreed that there should be someone responsible of AI within the government back in 2017. What the UAE government did at that time was the appointment of the first Minister of Artificial Intelligence in November 2017. Maybe at that time it was a bit of an early move, but because the UAE believed that it was a necessity at that point of time to have someone to prepare our government for a moment that the one we're living in today, UAE today ranked among the 5 top powers globally when it comes to AI, whether it's on AI adoption, investments, or research on AI. So I think the same discussion is happening today in Africa, where some might see this as a luxury. In Africa or other emerging markets, this is more of a necessity rather than a luxury or something that you look at in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Marianne, my next question to you is on digital infrastructure. How can we make sure that there is equitable access to digital infrastructure, maybe everywhere, but also maybe focusing on emerging markets and emerging economies?
Well, thank you, because your question of making sure that everyone has access to digital infrastructure really resonates to who we are, at SWIFT. Just a few words as a background, because I'm not sure everyone knows what SWIFT is. So SWIFT is the global leader of financial messaging. We are a global inclusive cooperative, and we are connected. Well, we are present in more than 200 countries in the world. We have a connection to more than 11,500 financial institutions and corporates in the world, so of course, including also in India. And we are also completely currency agnostic. So it means that anyone can trade in whatever currency, at least 150 currencies on our network, and we're supporting 40,000 corridors in terms of payments and trade. So it really results. It's really our DNA, I would say, to make sure that any financial institutions which is regulated, who has a minimum standard in terms of cybersecurity, can have access to global payments and enabling whoever, businesses, consumers, to trade everywhere in the world, to invest, to pay, and so on. So that being said, when we look at global trade, so it has been also said extensively, at the opening yesterday, but global trade has been one of the key drivers of global growth, right? Bringing really opportunity, prosperity for many, many countries. And trade, of course, is also underpinning all the payments that, cross-border payments. I don't know if you know, but 50% of cross-border payments have an underlying on trade. So trade is essential, and we are. This is the first thing. Second thing that we see is that there's a proliferation of new technology solutions, payment systems. For instance, you have different instant payment system in India, a very powerful one with UPI. You have it in 70 or 80 countries in the world. You have new payment system. You have CBDCs, or potentially soon to come CBDCs, tokenized assets, and so on. So that's the positive side of it, is that it offers choice to people and to businesses to trade on different platforms. The thing that needs to be really tackled is that we need to ensure that this proliferation of, payment systems that are not today connected to each other, we need to ensure that it doesn't lead to financial fragmentation. financial fragmentation, so the reduction of economic integration due to the fact that the underlying payment systems and the global economy is based on a complex set of networks, payment systems that if they are not well connected or interoperable, well, the economy really suffers. We have, there's many reports that have analyzed the impact of fragmentation in the industry. I'd like to highlight one, which we commissioned to the Economist Impact. It's part of the Economist Group on the impact of markets fragmentation. And the results are really clear. And if we do not tackle, this fragmentation, it can have really impact on capital flows. So a reduction of, for instance, foreign direct investments. It can have impact on global GDP, up to 6%. So on 2030, the FMI was about 6%. Another study by the World Economic Forum is 5%. So it's really consistent across the board. An impact on employment also. So 280 million jobs that will not materialize. So, and no country benefiting from fragmentation. So this means that we really need to have, this global market infrastructure, messaging, financial infrastructure that are here to connect the world and to make sure that we still connect, the different networks and systems that will appear, because you were talking about Web3 and CBDCs, but how do you do if I want to send a payment to a country who has a CBDC which is not connected to the rest of the financial system? How do you do? So we will be really committed to do that. So that's very important to remain really digital inclusive, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you, Marianne. I'll move to you, Stephanie. Big tech companies today control much of the digital infrastructure in the global south, from cloud services to AI. How do we ensure that digital sovereignty remains in the hands of the local governments and businesses rather than concentrated in Silicon Valley or in Beijing?
Thank you. So no small question. I think if we're going to think about digital sovereignty, I think we have to think about it from quite a pragmatic way and to think about what does sovereignty look like in a digital age. And what it's not going to look like is looking back where it means that one country is, say, able to control and own its infrastructure. We've seen from my colleague who spoke about semiconductors to thinking about Web3. Government and private sector activity in a digital age is inherently global. The platforms we are using, if we think about the fact that the governments are based on the internet, this means that our critical infrastructure of the state is necessarily across borders. And even if you are China or the US, you can't think in isolation if you're going to think about maintaining this infrastructure. So then what does it mean to be sovereign? If the infrastructure that we're based on is going to be owned by companies that exist outside of our borders, if we're going to have to depend on supply chains that are very complex and sit outside of our borders. And so I think for that, where I like to start then is thinking about what's the effective sovereignty. And again, it's about if a country is interested that the interests of its people, government, and businesses are put first, and it's able to continue to protect them over time, how do you do that in this networked world? And I think, well, from one view, the Russia-Ukraine war has shown us some of the challenges of what not to do. I think the current discussions over Starlink and Elon Musk's ownership points to the fact that we need to be thinking a lot more specifically about what are the ownership structures of the companies that we're depending on, and how do we work across different companies so that countries are not stuck and dependent on one. I think there is probably something particular about, say, Starlink being owned by an individual and not being a public company. Like, I think we need to be thinking in that space. And then we need to be thinking about how smaller countries can work together to think seriously about how do we manage these different interests so that we are not caught in a position where we are suddenly cut off. And I think that's where again, that's a bit abstract, but I go back to what some of you guys have raised already as well. In one, we need to think about looking in new places and think differently. And that means having the space to think about different futures of what our digital world could look like, from the global south, from the needs, experiences, knowledge systems of different places around the world. We need to get unstuck from one way of thinking about how companies are owned, how they relate to the state, and how different visions of what that could look like. And so I think that needs to come from the global south. That means we need to have the space to have those conversations and the capacity in government. So one of the challenges I've seen is, as for example, some governments have been sort of looking at and working within Africa, for example, it's very difficult to have the capacity and space in government to have the time to think seriously through the trade-offs of different models for digital infrastructure, because there's such a push to develop this quickly, because we're starting from such an unequal space. But in a sense, I don't think we can cut that short. And so for me, the challenge would be is one, being open to different knowledge systems about what sovereignty looks like, knowing that it's not going to be in isolation. And then two, how do we create the space in government with the private sector and academia for governments to really understand and grapple with the trade-offs that are going to come from working with different companies across borders, as is going to be necessary.
I have a question, Stephanie. I wonder whether a system like Starlink, while it is creating, so to say, access to the internet and digital everywhere, isn't it a killer for sovereignty?
I don't think it has to be a killer for sovereignty. I think only having one company that's providing it and having it privately owned by an individual means that, what is a small government going to do? Like, Starlink's business doesn't depend on it being accessed in every African country, right? And so you need to think about, how do governments protect their interests versus the company? And I think lack of competition, and the fact that, I think it's another slight tangent, but you can see it even early on in the war with Elon Musk speaking to Russia, Elon Musk speaking with the Ukrainian government. One individual having that much power relative to two countries makes it very difficult for the countries to think about sovereignty and accountability there.
So any rulership required from national governments and anything ongoing you may share with us here?
No, I think one space that might be interesting to look at would be to look at Starlink in the space of other internet companies, and to look at their different ownership structures and look at how they relate to governments in different ways. Because Starlink is just one example and that makes the news, but it's not the only way to think about how this could play out. So I would start there. And then I think there's also needs to be space for governments to be working together, because one country is not necessarily going to be able to negotiate with Elon Musk, but there could be potential capacity if you look at it from a bigger market perspective.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Andreas. Maybe I'll move back to you, Mr. Singh, and it's a follow-up question, or maybe to build on this discussion. Cybersecurity and data privacy are major concerns in digital governance. How can governments balance the need of inclusivity, innovation, and regulations, particularly in regions where digital literacy levels vary and maybe high in some regions?
Yeah, in fact, I would let me just begin with the discussions with regard to sovereignty and then come down to cybersecurity and data privacy. See, of course, if we are relying on one single company or one single individual owning a company for all your needs, then it's a big risk to sovereignty. What we need to do in today's world is that in various domains, whether it's having access to internet services or having access to defense equipment, military supplies, you are dependent in a global economy for electronics, semiconductors. You are dependent on multiple global entities. But when you are doing that dependency, and it's not only about internet, it's about almost everything that we live today. In fact, even the food that we are having, we're dependent on a global economy. We need to kind of ensure that we are not dependent on only one entity. We have a choice. And then we are doing that. We also have to kind of assess with regard to risks of having that dependency vis-a-vis not having at all. So when it comes to, for example, having a Starlink connectivity, we can have that or we cannot have that. If we deny internet connection, what is the cost that we are going to pay? So those are nuanced discussions and decisions which every government need to take, and they will take it based on their own situation where they are in, the requirement of a particular service, how do you negotiate a contract, and how do you go forward on that. Having said that, the risks will remain. Even if you are using Swift or if even those risks will remain, whether it's Starlink or Swift or any other service. So one will have to be conscious of those risks and try to take necessary measures in order to ensure that we minimize the risk. Probably in today's world, it cannot be brought down to zero, but the minimization of the risk and having a risk mitigation strategy will be something that will be held. Now, with regard to the question that you had with regard to cybersecurity and ensuring that people are provided access. So again, when we go digital, for example, our own experience of implementing digital public infrastructure, when we go digital, when you start offering online services to people, there is some degree of compromise with regard to personal data that you need to share with the service provider in order to get access to that service. So like, for example, if I use Google Maps, I know that Google Maps knows where I am traveling. So that kind of information I am sharing with that, but then again, I assess the risk of benefiting from the service vis-a-vis the risk of an entity knowing everything about me. So again, it's always a calculation that you do with regard to the pros and the cons. And if you value the benefits more than the potential risks which are there, you go ahead and do that. And it operates at the individual level, it operates at organizational level, it operates at national levels. So when we implement our cybersecurity strategy, again, we try to see that, especially in a country like India, where we are quite vulnerable when it comes to this amount of cybersecurity attacks that we have from our, given the geopolitical situation we are in, we have to have a very robust cybersecurity strategy. We again have invested a lot in building the institutions, whether it is a certain or whether it is the National Cybersecurity Secretariat, which constantly monitor the traffic which is coming in and tries to ensure that our cyberspace remains secure. A lot of things people don't get to know because those attacks have been prevented. So data breaches are something that we are always fearing that it may have, but organizations need to have robust cyber information security policies, regular audits, plugging in patches, building capacities in order to ensure that we remain safe. And for offering public services, empowering people, when you go digital, there are people, like for example, we implement the ID project, Aadhaar, which many countries across the world think that it's like an personal data of citizens are being shared for offering public services. But the amount of empowerment it brings to people, like for example, if people are able to access food rations, if people are able to access healthcare, if people are able to access education, then that's a cost worth paying by implementing such a project. One key example is financial inclusion. Like before the implementation of the Aadhaar project, we had only 20% Indians who had access to bank accounts. And the one reason they could not have bank accounts because they did not have any ID documents. But when we implemented this Aadhaar project, everybody got an ID, and with that they were able to open bank accounts, and within 8 years we opened almost 510 million bank accounts. Today the financial inclusion is almost 90%, and opening a bank account is the first step towards financial empowerment. Then next comes credit, next comes insurance, and there's an entire network of e-services. So I would say that to build a truly inclusive, empowered society, we do need to go digital. But while doing so, we need to safeguard against the potential risks of cybersecurity or data protection that are there.
I would have another question in that regards. I'm just wondering, based upon a discussion I had yesterday with the chair of UNILIT Institute, which is the university arm of the Ministry of IT and Electronics, I understand. I learned that Indian households are to a vast majority using smart meters, but they are unprotected, so there is no hardware security bridge in those smart meters included. So what is the policy there? Just as a concrete example, is that a topic? Because from an outside perspective, it looks as if every household can be hacked very, very easy through the smart meter. Is this an issue?
No, the smart meters come with chips which have a cybersecurity component built into the chip, which has a block which is encrypted. So I would not think that it's so easy to hack into any into any smart meter. In fact, the same applies to the solar grid also, because once you are having solar panels, and when you are integrating the solar power panels onto the grid, then again there are risks which people think that one could hack into any house by using using the chips which are there in the solar power system, but the cyber security architecture of India have imposed. They are putting sufficient level of safeguards to ensure that such an eventuality doesn't happen.
So again, semiconductors are the solution.
Yes, they are. Semiconductors are there everywhere.
It's good.
So back to you, Andreas. We spoke about sovereignty that's becoming a major global issue, with countries trying to build their own semiconductor capabilities and industries. How do you see the risk? As is it a risk to global innovation and collaboration, or it's a necessity and a necessary shift in digital economies?
Look, that whole topic of availability of semiconductors in general versus availability of semiconductors at affordable prices and cost, that is a huge challenge with regards to then resilience of supply chains from a national perspective. In other words, semiconductor industry probably is one of the most globalized industries on planet Earth. You can find specific elements that are required to manufacture and to develop semiconductors in specific different regions, which evolved over many, many years, not to even say over decades, that helped to find cost-wise or economy of scale-wise commercially meaningful optimization points. So less cryptically speaking, it makes a lot of sense to have large-scale semiconductor fabrication fabs that do the silicon manufacturing at certain points in the world. There are other points in the world where the equipment is being manufactured efficiently that is used for making these chips. You have different points in the world where all the material is being composed, base material to make chips, and so on and so forth. So if you will, ensuring a completely resilient supply chain within one's country's economy is a huge contradiction in terms of economy of scale and economy of scope, i.e. affordability of what we so hungrily strive for. So this new gold or oil, if I may use this terminology of contemporary times, which are semiconductors. Semiconductors you can find everywhere. So having said that, what we are trying to do also as company in Finland is to continue leveraging the, so to say, cost performance best places on planet Earth. And that is, so to say, globally distributed to ensure that through a distributed value chain, and again, I speak from the context of an international semiconductor maker, we can provide the best cost to performance points to whomever, and to make them available smart meters with security chips that simply allow a smart meter to be delivered at a price point that an Indian household can also afford. So, in essence, I warn us from all those tendencies that strongly go in a direction. Every country needs to make semiconductor development, manufacturing, and so to say, then logistics around it available national. There comes a huge, huge inflation ticket with this. But it's a deliberate choice.
Thank you, Andreas. Then, where blockchain is often sometimes linked to speculation, in Africa, it's creating real-world solutions for remittances, trade, and financial inclusion and financial identity. Maybe can you shed some light on some examples or compelling examples where blockchain has already proven its impact beyond the hype? And if this could be a best practice where other nations, other regions could also benefit from?
It's a very good question. I think before I get on to that, something that was ringing in my head relating to the concerns around one entity having so much influence. And I think it's the analogy of if you have a road and there's too much traffic on it, if you build more roads, will there be more cars or will there be less cars? Right? And I think it's probably something to think about very clearly is the issue around an entity like Starlink has to do with the individual and how much money they're making, or is it their capacity to deliver better than other companies? I'm not trying to start trouble. It's just a question, something for us to think about. But yeah, in relation to Africa, real experiences is the Central Bank of Ghana launched something called the ECD, which essentially was, it was a prototype to a potential CBDC that we plan to hopefully take live at some point. And they tested it out in rural areas in Ghana. And essentially that pilot, should I say, was very successful, particularly around the rural areas, the villages, because the unbanked is a problem in Africa, as we already know, right? And yes, mobile penetration is going up. The banks are becoming very innovative on how they attract new consumers, etc. But this particular pilot went down very well. And actually, it is what stimulated the conversations around what policies need to be put in place to have a very strong digital strategy for Ghana. But off the back of that, what became something that was very interesting that we found out is IP, intellectual property protection on the blockchain. And so what we don't have in Africa is when it comes to our intellectual property, there wasn't a very secure way of protecting creators, right? And whilst doing that pilot, if you have, for example, a manufacturer in the north of the country who may not have as much recognition as a brand in Europe or in the Western world, right? Now, through the infrastructure of the blockchain, they could protect their intellectual property and distribute it in a commercial, in a much more efficient commercial way that would make them money, right? And that was very, very interesting data that we got from that pilot that was being rolled out. The other thing I think that's also, not so much Web3, but we've seen how mobile money has worked on the continent, right? And what's starting to happen now is the mobile money is going to start integrating digital currencies into its infrastructure. That's the next stage for Africa. And so the mobile money is done so well in East Africa and then moved over to Sub-Saharan Africa is that I see a very harmonious ecosystem, even with the likes of SWIFT, digital currencies with the new policies that will be coming out. And I actually see a situation where the scalability of trade solutions locally and within neighbor countries becoming a lot more, like growing exponentially over the next decade. And so, those are one or two examples that I've personally experienced and we will see more of growing in the West Africa region in particular.
Can this be exported to other regions in Africa?
Absolutely. I think what we're seeing now is different regions have different strengths, and what we're trying to do is bring them together, which is why actually a lot of the central banks have started to put policies in place, some that Ghana and Nigeria have actually strategically contributed to, and vice versa. And so you're starting to get blocks within Africa collaborating on what the infrastructure should look like. So I think in the next decade, we're going to have a very harmonious DeFi ecosystem.
Thank you, Del. Marianne, moving to the rise of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, and blockchain-based finance, traditional banking infrastructure is being challenged, of course. How do you see SWIFT adapting to this shift? And will decentralized finance play a role in mainstream finance systems?
Thanks for your question. I think it relates to what I was also saying previously, that the industry, the financial industry is going to fragment. So whether because of or thanks to technological advancements like CBDCs or tokenized asset platforms or other means, or geopolitical tensions, or any other reasons, or because there's more competition and so on. So so in this fragmented world, and to make sure that it does not impact global economic growth, as I was mentioning, you need to make sure that those different systems are still connected to each other and to the global financial system. Because otherwise it's just digital islands that close loop, but it's not, they cannot really trade with one another. For instance, if Ghana has its own CBDC, how will it trade with another African country or European country? So what we intend to do, and what we have done, is to build an interoperability framework. So interoperability is a big word. It means to have seamless communication and exchange of data between different systems. It's like the interoperability of a phone, for instance. If you send an SMS, whether you have an iPhone or another phone from another company, if you are using a telecom communication X and the other one, or the one that you send the SMS has another telecommunication company, then you still can send an SMS and you can still send an email. So it has to be the same for payments to support global growth and global trade. So what we're doing is this interoperability framework. We have tested it at large scale with more than 40 financial institutions, central banks, to make sure that CBDC platforms, and we simulated CBDC platforms based on two different blockchain technologies, two different DLTs, can be exchanged. Digital euro could be exchanged with a digital, whatever, for instance, Indian rupee. And can also be exchanged with the traditional fiat money, the traditional financial system. So this is where we are putting our effort today, is to make sure that whatever, DLT platforms or other type of technology, we're agnostic of technology, can be also instant payment systems using more traditional technology that can be connected and support, therefore, global growth and global economy.
Thank you. Stephanie, misinformation, AI-generated content, and algorithm bias are shaping public discourse in ways that are only beginning to understand. What responsibility do governments have in regulating these spaces without undermining free expression and innovation?
Thank you for that question. I guess to start to address it, the issues of biased information, propaganda, fake news, as we know, didn't start with technology either. It also doesn't necessarily sit outside of governments either. So it's not just the prerogative of the private sector or an unregulated platform. It also exists in government as well, too. So the sort of binary that if governments regulate, these problems will go away, or it doesn't work that way, because it's a messier landscape and it's not just a technological problem. That said, as we've seen with algorithmic systems already, there is a strong bias when the opportunity exists to create fake content quickly at a low cost. We see that happening. We also see, as we move into some of the large language models and generated content, we see similar biases coming up. So I've been involved in some research looking at the biases around base prompts with some of the sort of large, the dominant large LLM models that we're using now, and very similar biases around how we see the world, a sort of Western white bias. It still comes through, and it comes through probably because of the data is still incredibly unequal. The ownership of the companies, as we know, is unequal, and where they're based, and the designers, and the way that we think about intelligence is also very particular, and it's based on a particular idea of intelligence. And when that's built into the systems, we end up with certain content with particular biases. I guess then thinking about government's role in regulating, without harming free speech. I think one, they have to play a role, and I think part of that comes from the fact that if speech is completely open, especially in the age where it's becoming increasingly easy to generate fake content quickly and at scale, that type of environment that is overloaded with fake information is not open and free. It's also crowded out in a different way. There's also censorship by overloading the information environment, as well as censorship through removing content. And so I guess in that sense, there needs to be a role for regulation around both sides. I don't think governments have the capacity to necessarily do it. I don't think platforms have the interest to do it. And we're seeing that, especially with the American platforms now, following on from sort of Trump's interpretation of what a free speech environment looks like. For good and bad, I'm not don't want to put my politics on it. But where am I going with this? I guess what I would say is at least governments have accountability to the people they rule and a desire for sort of stability and legitimacy within a place that has an accountability structure that goes back to individual citizens. And so in some ways, it seems like the best we have to try to create that balance. But that balance is going to have to come from thinking about it both in terms of enabling content, but also creating the space for citizens to express different views without being overloaded. And what that looks like is going to take more than just these minutes now, but you can come back to it in questions.
Thank you, Stephanie. Mr. Singh, you have worked extensively in the intersection between technology and governance. Many argue that the biggest challenge today isn't the lack of digital tools, but the lack of political will and governance innovation to fully utilize them. From your experience, what does real leadership in digital transformation look like, and what advice would you give to governments struggling to modernize?
Part of it I already referred to in my first response, but I would say that, as you rightly mentioned, the political will and the leadership and the push from the top is very, very essential, because for any new technology to adopt it, if it is not owned by the top management, this applies not only to countries, it would apply to organizations also. If you are bringing in a new culture in an organization, it has to be owned by the top management. It cannot be done only by directions to everyone down below to follow it. So in our story also, our digital transformation story, we began with solving a very simple problem. We began with solving a problem for KYC, the need of an ID document for people to get access to financial inclusion. So that was the basic core, and then it was realized that identity is a core thing. How do you give identity to 1 billion plus people? The simplest thing was to trust what they have, which is their biometrics, the iris and the biometrics, and now, of course, face authentication. That led to being adopted. But when we are doing that, involvement of every state in India, we are a federal state, the 29 states and 7 union territories, the chief ministers, the lieutenant governors, they all became part of it. And that's how we were able to implement this project in a very, very short time. Then added on to that, like once you have identities, once you have bank accounts, what do you do next? Like cash transfers, like direct benefit transfers. All governments across the world are doing a lot of welfare for their citizens. How do you ensure that whatever dues or whatever subsidies, whatever welfare, whatever doles you are giving to the citizens, which is their right, they get it without any delay and without any deduction? So we are able to implement DBTs across more than 400 schemes. We have been able to save billions of dollars equivalent by implementing these schemes. And during COVID, it came as a very handy way, because when we had to transfer money to those who needed it, when the lockdown was there and people were kind of at the verge of losing their livelihoods, we could do that instantly. Compared to many other countries which did the same transfer through paper checks or plastic cards, and till date it's very difficult to reconcile who got what and who didn't get. Similarly, when we're doing the vaccination platform, again, to vaccinate 1 billion plus people with multiple vaccines with different time intervals between different doses, it was a logistical challenge. But again, we were able to solve it with technology. And to implement that, we did get the best of the support from our Prime Minister, who kind of vouches for digital technologies. In fact, every speech that he gives, he mentions about it. And now that we are adopting artificial intelligence in a big way, again, AI is again going to be a big, big empowering tool. And we are looking at AI as the top level of DPI, because it's enabling voice-enabled transactions. So what we feel, again, in our unique situation, we are a diverse country with 22 official languages and many other languages. How do we ensure that people are able to access services through voice? because many people are not very comfortable going to a web browser and negotiating a captcha or downloading an app or registering there. They would like to talk to a mobile phone or to a toll-free number with a feature-free phone with their voice command in their mother tongue and get the reply back in their mother tongue. So all these projects, again, does require political will, does require leadership from the top. And when that comes, it's up to the job of the tech companies and the civil servants who are implementing it to come out with necessary institutional structures, build in teams, and implement that. So that would, I think, is the recipe for success when you're implementing digital public infrastructure projects.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. I'm just being mindful of the time here. If any of the panelists would like to add final remarks before I move to the Q&A question, please feel free to do so. So now we'll have around 15 minutes for audience questions. Again, to ensure that we get so many voices heard as possible, please keep your questions short and direct. Just your name, organization, your question, and who is it addressed to. And let's try to avoid comments or statements, please. Let's start with our first question. Please.
Yeah, my name is Nitin Seth. I'm the CEO of Incido. So the topic is about digital divide, and question to you to begin with, Mr. Singh, that there are two fundamental issues. There are many things that can help bridge the digital divide, but there are two very big factors which can further increase it. The first is the cost and the access to the infrastructure, especially the compute infrastructure, and and GPUs becoming like the real currency, and their access is limited. So that's kind of question number one. That especially for a country like India, how do you deal with that? Number one. Number two is about jobs. That, with AI, there is a very significant long-term impact on jobs. Some estimates are that in 15 years, 50% of jobs will go. Now, that's particularly an issue for a country like India, also Africa, which have a very young pyramid. Yeah. And in the short, medium term, even one of India's largest exports, which is technology services, may get hit, because of productivity through AI. So that's the second question, which can, further increase the divide, that if AI starts to put pressure on jobs. So yeah, those are my two questions to you.
Again, very, very relevant questions, very pertinent questions, and especially I would say that on the cost front, in fact, the same questions we addressed when we were looking at implementation of the India stack or the digital public infrastructure. And there also, of course, we had the advantage of our size. The cost of implementing Aadhaar or the cost of implementing DigiLocker or the cost of implementing UPI has been very, very minimal. Like, for example, the KYC costs with Aadhaar is less than a rupee, a few cents in dollar terms, less than a rupee per person compared to what it was earlier, more than 200 rupees for earlier. DigiLocker costs are 15 paisa. So kind of gains that are there are much more. When it comes to AI, yes, the GPUs are expensive, but the way we have designed our AI strategy is that, yes, we are trying to subsidize the cost of GPUs for the developers so that they are able to develop the solutions and then they will be able to implement these solutions. And then when we are building using AI to deliver voice-enabled services, empowering the 500 million remaining people. Because very often we say that 900 million people in India are connected and they are doing online transactions, billions of transactions. But while we say that, we know that 500 million are not. And to empower them, we need voice-enabled services, we need services in various languages which AI will enable. So the cost of implementing that is much lesser compared to the value that will be created when these people get on the online ecosystem. The second question with regard to jobs with AI, yes, that is a challenge. There will be some jobs that will be lost or they will lose relevance, but they will not be lost because of AI. They will be lost to people with AI skills will lose job to people without AI skills will lose job to people with AI skills. So that brings in the very important issue of reskilling, upskilling, ensuring that people acquire data analytics skills, AI skills, are able to take up the jobs that will be created in the AI economy. Everybody will become more productive. The job of 3 coders might be done by 1 coder, but then if they acquire the AI skill, they can move up the value chain. So it's not an easy thing to do. In fact, Nilet, with whom you signed the MOU, they are working on a whole plan of training a lot of people. We have a portal called Future Prime Skills, which is giving people skills in AI, in blockchain, in IoT, in AR, VR. So one will have to be prepared to take advantage of the new economy, the new digital economy, the new new AI economy is emerging, we cannot sit back and say that we will not do AI because we want to preserve those jobs. We don't have a choice there. We need to move up the path, and we need to take up this reskilling, upskilling across our academic institutions and all in order to remain competitive.
Let me echo what Mr. Singh just said in that regards. So the question was what to do in terms of availability of GPUs and AI hardware. I personally find it not a proper solution to now throw all one's nation money into establishing a sort of a GPU design and manufacturing capability locally. That costs dozens of billions and takes long period of time. So having said that, I'm always of the opinion to use what is commercially meaningful, available, and AI infrastructure. You can find tons of those, partially residing here in the country, partially residing in other parts of the world. But the art is to make use of that hardware, AI hardware, in a way how it was just described by Mr. Singh. So I see a huge chance, based upon also my understanding of talent in India, to take a leadership role in the area of applied artificial intelligence, which is something that is to a large degree, from what I oversee, underestimated in terms of its importance. And what I mean here is use your talent to derive, if you will, machine learning based models that simply make manufacturing, as an example, more easy, more efficient, and more competitive as one result. So I'm coming back to the nature of what does this do on jobs? Well, it changes the nature of jobs going forward, there's no doubt. While AI will substitute quite a lot of things that today are done by mankind, it creates the opportunity for, so to say, doing something in the backbone, and India, with its talent, as I said before, to excel. And the name of that is applied AI, to be exported and also potentially towards the whole of the globe. Yeah?
I'd like also, to react to your question, and thank you, because they are very important questions. I'd like to react in the fact that I think AI can also be really for the greater good, I would say. So, for instance, SWIFT is, as I said, a global cooperative, and we're here not to maximize our profits, but to maximize the value of what we bring to the ecosystem, to mutualize costs for the industry, and to also build solutions that are there for everyone. So AI, for instance, can be used, and we have developed that, can be used for preventing and detecting fraud or anomalies in payments, combating also the money laundering, financing to terrorism, and so on. So I think here, applying AI will really will be really for the common and public good of all the financial community across the world that will use this common tool, I would say, and so to build it and to make it even more powerful.
Yeah, just briefly on the need for education, especially with emerging economies within Africa and just global South in general. One of our things that we've focused on with institutions is we need to be where the ball is going to be, not where the ball is, and integrating education into whatever commercial visions that AI or digital companies have in mind. As you mentioned, in the case of Africa, we have majority of the world's youth there. Education is a key component of our vision to ensure that their youth are equipped for the future that is ahead. Well, the future is now, but, they are very well equipped for the kind of opportunities that are going to come. So I would, India's education level is pretty high globally, and integrating that into your current curriculum would be wise.
Thank you, Del. We'll take one more question. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Andres Vicente. I'm managing Ericsson in Asia. So I have a very broad view regarding how these things are evolving across the world. In my view, I think that India has taken the right choices on a single technology, which is connectivity, that allow the full ecosystem to scale up. So I think that is key. And I think that India made all the right decisions, to bring this to life, because all of us on an isolated basis, we are contributing to the existence of this ecosystem. We build networks. There's people that build semiconductors. There's people that build services on top of that. But they need to reach the citizens. And this is the tool that reach the citizens. So I think it will be very important for other countries across the world to reflect a little bit on what you have done, what have you positioned as a front runner in 5G. You have already declared your ambition in order to be one of the promoters and pioneers in 6G. So I think that will be very important, because at the end, connectivity is the lever that you can use in order to scale up the digital ecosystem. And it's also your control point, because the spectrum is owned by the government and infrastructure is set in the country. So that basically guarantees digital sovereignty. So if you could reflect on that, I think that it will be very helpful, especially for other countries in Africa and many other places in the world.
You very rightly said, connectivity is important. And just like, in fact, if you traditionally take the analogy with the physical world, the roads do empower people. When the roads reach a lot of services, a lot of goods, and people get connected to the real world. Similarly, digital connectivity, whether it's through 5G, whether it's through 4G, or whether it's through fiber, or whether it's through Starlink, it does empower people, because then people are able to get onto the digital highways, explore what is there, seek knowledge, access healthcare, get onto e-commerce portals, platforms, build economies, access financial services, and then the remoteness or geographical isolation does not remain a barrier. So connectivity is very, very important. In India, we do have taken a project for connecting every village, every household, every school, every sub-center, health center, every Anganwadi center where newborn children and pregnant women are given nutritional support, connected on a fiber network, provide them information, services, to benefit. So that's a program that we do have. We have several schemes which enable that. We work with multiple partners which ensure such a network can be created. 5G, our companies have innovated a lot. Today we have the maximum number of 5G rollout sites almost across the world. In fact, more than what the whole of Europe has. So this is truly empowering. So connectivity is essential. And in fact, after that, of course, comes the traffic that flows on those digital highways. So I cannot not agree with what you just said.
Thank you all for joining us on this breakfast discussion. Thanks to our panelists for the interactive discussion, the interesting interventions. Thanks to ORF and Dr. Samir Saram for convening all of us today. I wish you the best for the rest of the Raisina dialogue, and I hope we can continue this conversation in future occasions. Thank you so much.